Self-preservation is something everyone needs to practice. Hi everyone, it's Taryn. Thanks for coming back to Earth to Mars. So this video is all about the art of self-preservation while dealing with toxic people. Self-preservation is so needed, and being self-preserved is so important, especially if you have toxic people in your life. Now, when I say toxic, I am talking your classic narcissists, your low vibration people, people who only care about themselves. I mean, there are so many different types of toxic people. So before we get into the toxic people that can sometimes plague your life, I first want to go a little bit into self-preservation and what that means. Now, for all of my people out there who like a good definition, self-preservation is the protection of oneself from harm or death, especially regarded as a basic instinct in human beings and animals. So in a nutshell, self-preservation will help to protect you against anything that threatens your health or your well-being. And by protecting yourself from these threats, you'll always be operating at your best self. You're creating boundaries for yourself and the people you interact with. You recognize your limits or any triggers that you may have in certain situations, and you basically just swerve the other way, essentially. Now, I already know there's probably going to be somebody in the comments saying,
well, you can't live in this fantasy world. You can't always protect yourself from these perceived threats, and sometimes you'll just have to deal with toxic people.
While we absolutely cannot avoid dealing with toxic people or negative situations all the time, we can control, for the most part, how we choose to deal with these situations or how we choose to engage in them. So now let's move on to toxic people and navigating those situations using self-preservation. Now, how I learned about this way of life is because I've had to deal with toxic people in my own family. When it comes to family, you can sometimes overlook things, especially when you're younger, just because you don't know any better or because you were possibly raised in an environment to where this is all you know, so you think this is the way things are supposed to be. Eventually, you'll grow up and you'll see through all the smoke, and more times than not, you'll realize that some people are just really toxic. And just a little background about my personality, I'm a pretty chill person. I stay to myself, but if I'm ever faced with confrontation, I prefer to just, deal with it head on right there in that moment, just to get it out the way and so I can move on with my life. So that's the same approach that I would always use with toxic people in my life. Anytime they challenged me or they said or they did something just to, get a certain reaction out of me, that's the same approach I would always use. And honestly, that approach always left me feeling defeated. Because at the end of it all, the person that I had the conflict with and the person that you may be having a conflict with, there's a 95% chance they're not changing their ways anyway. So it got to a point for me where after I had these conflicts with these toxic people, my energy was messed up for the rest of the day. My mood was low, but they just went on living their life like nothing even happened. And one thing about toxic people and just miserable people in general, they love company. They love seeing you at your lowest point, and they love seeing you as the worst version of yourself because they thrive off of that energy. Eventually, I got hip to the psychology of toxic people, and I mean many years later, and I just learned to leave them to their own devices. Especially if you know that they're not the type of people who will do the internal work to make themselves better. So this is where self-preservation comes into play. The first and the most effective way, in my opinion, when dealing with negative or toxic people is by cutting them out of your life completely. And I know that sometimes can be a little bit easier said than done. The second way you can do this is by choosing your battles and determining if engaging with a certain person is even worth it. I'm gonna tell you now, more times than not, it ain't worth it. Another way to self-preserve is by setting boundaries for yourself and that person. Maybe you can only stand to be around this certain toxic person for like 15 minutes at a time, or maybe you can only tolerate them for like 2 days out of the week. So whatever it is, figure out what your boundary is with them and stick to it. So another way to practice self-preservation is by knowing when to walk away from a situation. If you end up in a negative situation with a toxic person, realize that you can remove yourself from the situation. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, so put yourself first. Another great way to practice self-preservation is actually by practicing self-care. This one was a really big one for me. I don't know what the technical term is, but it did something psychological to me to where I just felt so much better about myself that I hardly ever engaged with toxic people anymore. So some of the ways that I practice self-care is by meditating, or I'll take a spa day for myself. I limit social media. That's a really big one. And also I just surround myself with people that make me feel good. So basically just loving myself more. I found that the more I put myself and my well-being over others, life has just gotten significantly better for me. So I hope that this video helped out anyone who is dealing with negative or toxic people in their life and just knowing how to really utilize self-preservation more. As always, I will see you guys in the next video, and thank you so much for watching.